being more honest type thing. Wow, that took a minute to get that connected. Thank you for your patience. That I don't know what was wrong with that other SD card, but it would not work there. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Dear Lord, we thank you for our time that we can be here. I thank you for just all these people and how each of them are a blessing to me. I pray that we would learn as we kind of journey through Exodus together about those things that are sacred, like creating spaces for you. May we create spaces for you in our own hearts and lives. Amen.
Amen.
So these couple of chapters that we're looking at are kind of the boring chapters.
Yes.
I get more excitement reading a genealogy than I did about this. And I'm someone who kind of likes to build things as well. But something about just numbers and measurements that don't make sense to me, and it just was very boring. So my hope is to go a little bit faster. And you may have noticed that we originally were only going to do like half of today's material. So I just combined 2 weeks of presentation, and we're going to just kind of go through it a little bit quicker so it's less painful. Next week, though, is the exciting ones. It's the time where they make the golden calf. And so I'm excited. And next week will be a little funny. And we'll just wait for that. So anything, though, that stood out to you or questions kind of before we begin to walk through the chapters together, and we're not going to read them. We're just going to summarize them.
I was amazed at how tedious everything was.
Yes.
Yeah, minute. Yeah, just this measurement, this has got to be here, and that's got to be there. I'm going, Elise had it said it great. She says, how is this relevant to my life today? I think that's a great question.
What's my takeaway with this?
Yeah.
Or what was the question? Was anybody here Wednesday night when Reagan?
I was going to tag, yeah.
Oh, so if you're available on Wednesday nights, highly recommend coming to Reagan Shriver's class. It's I think it starts at 6:30
It does.
to 7:30, and it's in the New Path through the Old Testament. I think that's the name of it. But he did the first week like an overview of the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, and then he last night did the first 5 books, so the Torah. And then next week he'll be doing the prophets. So highly recommend, really, really fun. He took what we did in like a month and said it in 45 minutes and then added some really cool insights and like Christianized it. That was great. Yeah, so.
Is there any way that can be streamed or recorded?
You know,
I don't think they want to. I think
yeah, so, yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, there's a thing
That's
that,
really work.
But I don't drive at night,
Then you have
so
to
I
figure
can't
out some
tell.
other way. Get it from somewhere.
Okay, that makes sense.
There's nobody near me.
Oh, that's too bad. But you know what I'm curious about, because he went over the Jehovah, the 4 different
Adonai,
sources.
Yahweh.
Yes.
Oh,
What we read today, what source would that come from?
So generally, like there's, unless you're Deuteronomy, there's 2 main sources. There's priestly
Right.
and non-priestly. And the non-priestly sources are based on oral traditions that we used to call Elohist or E and Yahwist or J. Generally, you can think of it as Genesis is priestly and Yahwist or J source, and Exodus is priestly and the Elohist source. Roughly, you can think about it like that. I have a makeup of that because that's true. It's towards the end of Genesis, though, you start getting more and more E source kind of mixed in, and it kind of transitions over to it. Though in more kind of modern scholarship, we don't really talk about E and J as much. It's priestly and non-priestly, because there's just new schools since the documentary hypothesis. So, which is what he talked about. There we go. Any other questions about that? Okay, highly recommend to come. But one of the questions someone asked last night, I think it was Jerry's, where's Jesus in this? And that's what I feel like when I was reading this. I'm like, where are we going to look for something to kind of take away? We're gonna have something at the end. So well, hold on to your bootstraps until you get there. I will just say, one of the things to remember is in the ancient world, writing is really expensive and paper is very expensive. And so anytime someone's spending a large amount of something writing about it, it means it's important. Is anyone else warm in here? Or is it?
Yeah, Bart said you could turn that down if you
You know,
wanted.
I will, if I am warm, if enough other people get warm, I would be happy if we turned off that furnace.
See what the setting is.
Yeah.
It may be it's all the way up. Shall I just knock it back a little?
Yes.
The dial is max.
Okay.
You know, I'm not convinced on those that you can turn down the heat. I think you can just turn down the cold. Because it's just a
It's on coil.
furnace
Turn
thing.
all-
Radiator, thank you. I couldn't get to the term. So one thing to keep in mind about this, it's spending a lot of attention on the tabernacle and all the garments and everything. This was not just a blueprint. This was meant for public worship. And so it's telling us this is all very important, which can be the summary. And we'll get to why as we kind of work our way through. But this is what we're going to be looking at today. So remember, our readings that we do here follow the Jewish lectionary that they read together. And so chapters 25 through the middle of 27 is what they call the Teramua, or the donations. And so this is the first half of what we're going to be looking at. And that second part gets us through the beginning of chapter 30. And that's the you shall command. But roughly, the first part is how do you build the tabernacle and what are the main parts in it? And roughly the second part is about the priest and some donations that they take up. When we get to the part next week, it gets a little bit more exciting. Next week will be in 35 through 38, and he assembled. And it's when they begin to actually put it together, and then we're going to see the golden calf incident, which is funny when we look at it. So it'll be exciting. Oh, sorry, I skipped it. That's 30 through 34, about the golden calf and everything. So that's what we'll look at next week, 30 through 34. Here we are back on our map. I know it's been a minute since we've been in here. In fact, it's been a whole year. But we were up here in Egypt. The Exodus happened, so we crossed the Red Sea. They walked down here, and we've been camping out at Sinai for a long time, for many, many chapters. And essentially the rest of Exodus, we're still down here at Mount Sinai or Mount Horeb. Going back to the sources, they call it different things, but it's essentially the same mountain. And where we looked at in the past, I want to include some of the review that we had, because in chapter 20 is when we looked at the introduction of the Decalogue. And one of the things that we talked about with the Decalogue is that there are multiple ways of thinking about the law. And I just wanted to give this as a refresher because I think it's important. We like to typically divide the law or the laws into different parts. Usually people will talk about there's moral law, there's civil law, and there's ceremonial law. So civil is what happens when your ox runs away and ran over someone's foot, or it ate grass on their land. How do we kind of establish our society like that? The ceremonial law is how does the priest put the incense in the thing, and how many ounces or tea leaves do you put in, or something like that, very specific. The moral law is like don't kill people. And that's an okay way of looking at the law, but there's only 613, and all of them tell us about the heart of God and about making this new people. And so it can be helpful to divide them in categories, but I always like to tell people, when you look at it, remember it's all one law. There was no dividing it. It was just as important to not kill someone as it was of how many little incense leaves you put in the whatever thing that burns the incense. And then what we looked at last time was Exodus 21 through 24. And so that was when we looked at all the different specific laws and everything. And then it ended with the covenant being confirmed. And so this is all about establishing a relationship between Israel's God and Israel. And we talked about that it's almost like when a king would come under like a new reigning king or like an emperor. And they're establishing, if you're going to be under my authority. Here's all the benefits of being in my kingdom. I will take care of you. If someone attacks you, I'll send my armies. But there's responsibilities. You'll need to pay taxes. You'll need to pay me homage. And it's kind of that type of relationship. There's a give and there's a take, and it's back and forth. There's benefits, but there's also requirements. And that's what a lot of these laws are like. Makes sense? Kind of sound familiar? Great. Okay, let's go away from that. All right. So here we are in our stars. We're in Mount Sinai, and that's what we're going to jump into today in Exodus 25 through 27. So this is our first half of what we're going to look at. Starting in chapter 25, when we're going to begin to talk about the tabernacle. Now, I'll just give a caveat. I might accidentally say temple, because when I rehearsed this, I kept saying temple, and I'm sorry if I do, but if I do, erase it from your brain and plug in tabernacle. If I do it the first time, correct me, but if I start doing it more than that, have grace on me. So let's work our way through, because then after that, we'll move to chapters 28 through 30, and we're going to learn about some vestments, and I think that might actually be a little bit of fun. But starting here in chapter 25, and here's a picture of the tabernacle. I'm going to play a video that will explain some of that in more detail. But we're going to quickly work our way kind of through some of the parts. So Exodus 25 begins with all of these offerings that go for the tabernacle. So God commands Moses to ask them for gold, silver, bronze, all of these sacred cloths, yarn and linen, goat hair and ram skins, and then acacia wood. It's just a dense wood, kind of like it's the premium wood that you would build your houses with and everything like that. And oils and spices and all these things, a lot of riches. As we're going to look at this in a few slides, but it's like over 20,000 pounds of material, and that doesn't include the furnishings that go inside the tabernacle. It's a lot. It's like an outrageous number. I think you guys asked way back months ago, wait, how did all these slaves in Egypt end up with all these riches? It's a good question, and it's one that you ask right now. But if you remember, we go back when the Exodus happens in the story, all of Egypt gives them that money and sends them on their way. Still quite a lot of weight to be carrying through a desert for a long time. Then there's instructions on how they're going to build it. So here's a picture of this. Is in Israel. You can go to this mock-up tabernacle. Really cool. I forget what the name of this organization was. I don't know anything about them, but I thought that was really fascinating. And you can just see how it's big. It's really big. And here's a picture of what some of the parts might look like. So roughly there was a gate around the outside that had cloths in it. And then the tabernacle itself was then covered in all this goat hair and other curtains and fabrics and everything. And it would have these big pillars on the sides that you can see here. And when you look inside of it, so it has the lampstand or the menorah. I think I had golden lampstand in some of my main slides. There's the Ark of the Covenant way back here. There is the incense burning table. There's some other parts that we'll kind of work through. So the table for the bread of the presence. But if you're really interested in all of the dimensions, they're right there. And I won't say them. But they were big. And most of the stuff was made out of wood, but then covered in gold. Except for a few things, like the lampstand. So the lampstand was made entirely out of gold. It would weigh about 75 pounds. So it would be pretty big. And some of the cool parts about it is it's supposed to make you think about the Garden of Eden with the Tree of Life, with the way that it has these branches coming out of it. It was decorated with almond blossoms around it. And it served a very practical purpose. You don't have lights, and so it's to light it up. But it also has a lot of other symbols that are associated with it. You found us. We moved because it's too cold on the other side. Can you see this right here?
I'll move back here.
Okay.
I'm so sorry.
And here, I'm not going to go through all the different feet dimensions, even though I took a long time converting it. But I do want to just say the pounds. So it's hard to calculate the weight, because when they give the measurements, they're not precise weight measurements that we don't have direct conversions to. So this is all kind of a guess. And they could have given more. So it could have weighed more than this. This is just what was asked. So roughly what they're asked for is about 2,200 pounds of gold, 7,500 pounds of silver, over 5,000 pounds of bronze. And then the wood was like somewhere over 2,000 pounds of wood, but that's really hard to know because wood can be more dense or less dense depending on the rain. And there was all these other fabrics and all the furnishings. So there's not just the altar, there's all the utensils that you use for the altar. So it has a special shovel, it has special tongs, special prodding sticks that they would use to turn the animals over, all these things. But it would weigh maybe over 20,000 pounds of precious, precious materials, which when you hear that, what does that sound like to you? Like
Fort Knox.
Sounds like Fort Knox. To me, it sounds like a ridiculous amount of weight for people in a wilderness to carry about. I remember a few years ago in the Bible study that meets in this room, and Tom Ladd had calculated all of this stuff, and he's like, "This is just stupid." And when I look at it, I don't think stupid. I think they care about this a lot. It is an outrageous practical number, but it's to tell you they care about it. It's important. And that's what you need to keep hearing. Like, as it's giving all of this description and all of the detail, this is important. And it's important because this is a home for God. And so what this is all telling us is worshiping God is important. Sometimes things don't have to be practical. They can just be beautiful because God's worth it. And our worship of God is worth it. And where we'll get to the end is when we worship God, it's not just with buildings. God dwells in us, and so you're important too. And that's kind of what we'll end today with. Just a little bit of other facts about it. So this was not an uncommon description of building spaces like this for the gods to dwell in the ancient Near East. It was pretty typical. It tells us a lot of things. One, that when we worship God in an ordered way, and we create spaces for God in an ordered way because God's important and God is ordered, and God has preferences. And so we get that kind of reflected here. Also, and I forget which commentary I'd read this in, but do you know what a cubit is? Don't look right here because I haven't.
I just looked.
For anyone that didn't look, do you know what a cubit is? It's about 18 inches. Yeah, so it's from your elbow to your fingertips. Mine's probably not 18 inches, but maybe for an average height person, it might be 18 inches. What's really cool about this is all of the measurements are given in cubits, and they didn't have to be given in cubits. And so that tells you something. This divine place is used in human measurement. And it's almost like it's bridging the divine with the human, or the divine with the physical, or with creation. And that's really cool because it tells us something special about God, that God can be in this space. And God is not just like completely, totally out there and we could never understand God or grasp God or get God. We can make measurements for God in the way that we do measurements, which here you would do a cubit. Now we'd use feet or something else. I think that's really cool. I forget which commentary I read that in, but it really stood out to me. And it stood out to me as special. Some of the... Oh, wait, I thought I had the symbolism. Yeah, okay, before we watch the video. So some of the symbolisms, gold is one of those materials that represents purity and divinity. And so a lot of the things are coated in gold because of that. It's telling us, again, it's important and it's special. Silver is one of those things that might be associated with redemption, although I think that's a little bit of a stretch, but some people say that. And bronze is one of those things that does represent strength. It's a more versatile metal than gold or silver would be. And so covering the things in bronze is, are they going to get scratched a lot? Use it in bronze instead of gold or something like that. And Acacia wood is the premium wood. It's a premium building construction. And so when we're crafting this tabernacle and the things that go in the tabernacle, we're building them to last. These are pretty practical things, as well as being pretty elaborate. I wasn't going to share this, but I think I might. When Rachel and I used to clean houses, which we did before COVID, there became something I realized about premium building materials. and that's that they're all impractical and hard to clean. So, for instance, a fiberglass bathtub is a cheap bathtub, but you never really have to clean it. You can just wipe it off. I hate tile and grout baths because they suck to clean. It's just hard, mildew gets in there. And like, they're not better. They get cold. Like, it's a cold shower when you lean up against the wall. Fiberglass isn't like that. And that's true for a lot of different things. Even like the material that your countertop is made out of. Like, cheap things are easier to maintain a lot of the times than these more premium or fancy products. And I'm really convinced, I've not researched this, but as I would grumble while like scrubbing people's floors and everything, like tile kitchen floors are awful. Dust just gets stuck there, then it has grease. And it's just hard to get out of the grout. It's like, it's no other purpose, but it's harder to maintain. And I think that's why they became fancy. This is different than that. They're both fancy and practical. And so that's kind of cool. There's some other importance of the Ark of the Covenant. This is kind of the idea that God's dwelling on it. So I always thought about the Ark of the Covenant, that box, like God was inside of it. And that wasn't its purpose. It's a seat that God is sitting on. Because you can't make a picture of God, so you make the thing that God sits on. That's also true, and we'll see this next week. The golden calf, they didn't worship the calf. The calf is what God rode on. And that's a thing that was pretty common in the ancient Near East. And that's why it has that mercy seat, that thing that's being sat on it. It's God's throne. This is where God reigns and rules. There's a lot of stuff that's in the Ark of the Covenant. So it has the tablets of the law later, not at this point. It's going to have Aaron's rod that he's going to use again later, not at this point. It has the manna in it that they ate in the desert. We're going to watch a video that's going to talk about the temple. We're not going to watch the whole thing, just about 3.5 minutes. Before that, any questions? Okay, we're not coming back to the tabernacle. Oh, yeah.
Well, what is the difference between a temple and a tabernacle?
The tabernacle was for moving around. Once there's a more established one, they built the temple and it's permanent.
Oh, okay, thank you.
They both mean sanctuary or dwelling place.
Okay, thank you.
Can you hear that? The sound's coming out of my computer. Okay.
The tabernacle, the Mishkan. The Hebrew word means dwelling place. It was where God dwelled with his people, and its elements show us how to relate with God. After delivering the Israelites from slavery in Egypt, God gave them detailed instructions on how to build this dwelling. Once constructed, the Lord descended on the tabernacle in a pillar of cloud. Curtains separated the whole tabernacle from the rest of the Israelite encampment. In this courtyard was the tabernacle's largest piece of furniture, the altar. A wooden box covered with bronze, the altar was shaped as a square, measuring approximately 7.5 feet long and 7.5 feet wide. From top to bottom, it stood about 4.5 feet. Hollow space inside the box allowed priests to insert coals. Above was a bronze grating where priests would lay animals for sacrifice. A horn of one piece with the altar stood at each corner. 4 bronze rings under the ledge allowed one to insert carrying poles so the Israelites could transport the altar. Between the altar and the tent of meeting was a bronze laver. Priests had to cleanse their hands and feet here before offering sacrifices or entering the tent. Within the inner tent stood one of the most recognized elements of the whole tabernacle, the menorah, a lampstand with 3 branches that rose on each side to create a total of 7 lamps. This solid gold lampstand weighed about 75 pounds. Each lamp was a small cup that the priest would fill with oil to fuel the light. Each branch in the middle of the shaft had almond blossoms. The menorah served a most practical purpose. It was the only source of light in the tent, an eternal light that was never to go out. Also in the tent stood a wooden table covered with gold. On it was to always remain the bread of the presence. The bread of the presence symbolizes God's desire to be with his people. Incense was to burn continuously on the altar. God instructed the priests to replenish the incense every evening and morning. A curtain separated the holy place from the Holy of Holies. The menorah, the altar of incense, and the bread of the presence were all in the holy place, but outside this veil. Like the curtains covering the tent of meeting, this veil was blue, purple, and scarlet, with cherubim, a kind of angel. Beyond the veil, at the far end of the tabernacle, was the ark. The ark was a wooden box covered with gold. It was nearly 4 feet long. Its width and height were about 2 feet, 3 inches. Like the altar, the ark had rings and poles so the Israelites could carry it as they traveled. Within the ark were the 2 stone tablets on which God had written the 10 Commandments. Later, it contained a sample of manna and the rod that bloomed to reinforce Aaron's leadership. The mercy seat was the ark's lid and features prominently on Yom Kippur, or the Day of Atonement. At each end stood a cherub facing the other with its wings outspread. This cover was made of solid gold. The priest would sprinkle the blood of the sacrifice on this mercy seat, symbolizing that the nation's sins were covered for another year. While only the high priest would see it, the mercy seat was the key symbol of atonement that God would forgive his people. Though daily sacrifices on the altar were necessary for payment of sin, it was only...
All right, I'm gonna pause it because they go off on a Christian Baptist atonement rant, and I didn't want to play that. But I do just want to say, I really like this video. And one of the things that you might have noticed, some of these things might sound familiar to the way our church is structured, and later to the temple, because the way our worship space is designed mirrors this. So this, like in the temple, is that thing they call the court of the Gentiles. Anyone can come into this courtyard here. For us, it's the nave, which is it's Latin. It's where the people are, where the people sit. There's that wash basin that's like our font that you go through. Then you get up to the altar, kind of at the front, which is like right here. So this is then where the chancel would start. And as you go deeper and deeper, there's other layers, and that's like that carpet that we have up on the chancel is the sanctuary. So that's like inside of here, and then you go even further back, and then in the smallest part, we call it. Thank you, an Ombre, but it's a bad name for it. We used to call it tabernacle. In the Episcopal Church, they changed what they call it, but it should be called a tabernacle. And it's where you reserve like kind of the sacred element. It's like that most holy place. Like only the priest goes in there. It's the really special place. But what's really cool is that there's layers and layers and layers as you get more and more and more holy. But instead of thinking about it as we're keeping you away from God, God is getting closer and closer to you, is the idea here. Because God is God way up there. So we're making this space here where God's more and more and more. And so it's not about keeping you out or away from it. It's about getting God closer to you. So it's really cool. I don't want to spend too much time talking about that. I do just want to say with the golden lampstand or the menorah, the almonds on it are these blossoms. And so, if you remember before I talked about it's like that tree of life in Eden. It's the place kind of life and light is coming from. And you get this idea that like the light from it is radiating from God's own presence and lighting up everything around you. I just think that's really cool.
I looked up almond blossoms, and one of the sources, it said the reason almond blossoms were used is it's usually one of the first trees that blooms in the spring.
Yeah.
So new life.
Which to me, I think of a red bud. Like that bright kind of pink that you see like first in the first blooms. So maybe if we made one here, it would be like a red bud tree or something. I don't know. You could probably craft a red bud to shape like a menorah. That would be fun. But that's the tabernacle. Any thoughts or questions on it? Kind of more exciting than you thought, or is it like,
It's interesting.
Interesting. I'll take that and some head shakes. I feel like I did a good job. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the outside of it. They covered the sides of the tabernacle with these fine linen curtains. and the top of it was covered with these goat curtains. I don't know about different types of linen. I'm assuming goat curtains are just more durable, but I have no idea. But that's what they did. I don't feel like that would look really pretty to have goat hair tops. I don't think of goats as a very pleasing animal to look at, but they would dye them into other things.
It's just like, yeah.
I guess, I don't know, just,
You'd
I
spin
think
it-
of goats as like
you'd spin
smelly
it-
and dirty
You'd
and stuff.
spin it into yarn and then you'd weave it just as any other.
Oh, would you? Okay, all right. I was thinking like how this picture here is like fuzzy and like very,
Oh, well, I mean, I don't know what they did.
yeah. But then there was the framework around it. And so this was the part that was all on the sides. And so they had all these big curtains that just made a boundary zone, essentially is what that was. And there's special ways it describes how they all fit together, and that's okay if you're into that. But one thing I do want to talk about is the veil or the curtain inside of it. So if you remember back in the New Testament, do you remember a veil maybe around the time Jesus dies?
Yes,
And it splits, yeah.
When he died.
So this not only has like some Christian significance that's used in the Gospels, this was the part that divided that most holy of the places inside the tabernacle and later inside the temple. It was designed very elaborately. So it is the place that's filled with the angels, and it was this very thick veil, very thick curtain. And what's really cool in the Gospels, when it's torn, the way that it's torn is from that top down, like God's the one tearing it apart. And what it's telling us in the Gospels, like before we were separated, so God dwelt in that most holy of places, and no one went in there except the high priest once a year. But now God's escaped. It is everywhere, which is really cool. But that's the veil, so it might have some.
So did they
Someone's
carry
team.
this whole thing with them all through the desert?
That's the idea, yeah.
My gosh.
Which you'll say practically it doesn't make sense. That it's a lot of weight, but it's there to tell us it's important.
Yeah.
It's important. It's important. It's important.
Yeah.
God's important.
So,
Also,
two ways of looking at that is
Yeah.
being literal and figuratively. If literally it's
Okay.
too heavy, but figuratively it was of importance.
and if you want to think more on the literal kind of side of things, they didn't move every single day. They would be in places for a long time, and it was made like something that they could transport. Think back to like Native American communities that would live here, and like maybe twice a year they would change the locations that they would go to, and their homes were very durable but also portable.
Sure.
But it's not like you moved it every week
Sure.
or something like that. Is that
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
All right, let's go to chapter 27. We're making good time. I like this. Okay, so this is the altar of burnt offering, that part that's out in the front. It was really, really big. Some of the things I didn't know about it is it had this grate on it, and so you would dump the coals inside of it and then the animal on top of it, and it would roast. For some reason, I always thought you like burnt up the animals or something like in the fire. And I guess they more roast it and you can smell it. And I guess that makes more sense because the priest would eat it. So it was like a way of cooking it. Yeah, like barbecue. I really always thought that they burned it up. But I guess not. And there's all this description of the different tools that they use to build it. I have a picture in a moment that will kind of show the size of it with a person by it. And around the court, there's descriptions of how far. Essentially, it's a big rectangle that's 2 by 1, with the longer part being north to south. The way that was set up, again, might make you think of our church that points south, which is why we're backwards, and it's longer on one side. It's not as wide in the middle. A lot of connections to how we have our architecture. And the curtain's heights going around it were 7.5 feet, which is no one could see. You had to go inside to see it. And so it's separating this boundary between kind of the sacred spaces and the more practical spaces, or the normal spaces. And there's also instruction given about the lamp. So it was a continually burning lamp. It was never supposed to go out. And the idea there is about this light that that it's eternal, and it's a reminder for us about God's own presence around us is always there.
Doesn't this church have the same thing?
Yes, it's the same.
So the ombre candle
Yes.
is never supposed to go out.
Good Friday.
One of the cool things about some of those flames is that a lot of churches will use flames that they'll say have been burning for 2,000 years or 3,000 years back, and some would say like back to this time, and then we got those from Jerusalem and bring them here. That's just really cool. During COVID time, Rachel's dad, he's a pastor, brought us a candle that was from Jerusalem that had been burning for like 200 years, and we kept it for a few weeks, and then we ran out of candles. But it was special to us that like something about a candle that's never been out and you're connected with it is special. And like you said, ours goes out on Good Friday. That's sad. And it's helping us live into that story. I felt like you had more candle thoughts. I was getting excited.
I was thinking also of the Olympic torch.
Oh, yeah.
I guess that's biblical.
I read there was somewhere an American tourist had gone to another country with an ever-burning flame and they put it out. And the American got arrested. And you're like, thanks for representing us and respecting other people's culture. So that's not the picture I thought it was. I think I have another picture coming up, but about the place of the burnt offerings. So they're doing all these sacrifices, which to me seems strange. But there's a few things. We talked about this before. Animals are expensive, so you have a sacrifice that's signifying the importance. But when we come to here, it begins to feel wasteful because it just seems impractical. But one of the things that we're doing is showing our own remorse about our own brokenness, our devotion to God and God's awesomeness, and kind of the weightiness that we're putting to the worship of God. That remorse has to do with the idea of atonement when they would kill the animal and use its blood. It has to do with forgiveness and everything. Like we talked about before, the courtyard and the hangings all there are showing us the separation. This is a sacred space that you're entering. Same as when we walk through the doors. We're entering into a sacred space. And all of that oil, it's, again, reminding us of God's eternal presence and love for us, which I think the candle might be one of my favorite things, that lampstand. One of the things I'll tell you I was surprised about, and I had an argument with Rachel, because this was a few weeks ago, we watched that video, and that one, and I was like, there wasn't a menorah in the tabernacle, they're wrong. And Rachel's like, yeah, there is, and she knew it from teaching Godly Play. She's like, our Godly Play box has a menorah. And I was like, no, a menorah didn't happen till like Maccabees, because it burns for 8 days. Well, and I was wrong. So, I'm telling everyone.
So they did have menorahs before that?
Yeah, I didn't know that. So that was new to me. But like even like on Hanukkah, like it has the eight sticks. How many lights are on the Hanukkah?
8 days. 9, aren't there?
Is there 9? Like there's 8 on each side? Because this one was 6
4
and
on each
7.
side and 1 in the middle?
Yeah, so maybe it got bigger. Because this one is, I think it's like 3 on each side, so 6, and then there's the 7th in the middle, which has some semblance that we'll get to in the next video we look at. We finished this section. Great. Any questions? Yes. Okay. Let's move on to the next 3 chapters. And actually, some of this I find interesting. So we're going to start off chapter 28. We're going to look at the priests' outfits. Here's a very, very short video. That's just a way of visualizing their outfits.
Your brother Aaron and his sons, Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar, will be set apart from the common people. They will be my priests and will minister to me. Make special clothing for Aaron to show his separation to God. Beautiful garments that will lend dignity to his work. Instruct all those who have special skills as tailors to make the garments that will set Aaron apart from everyone else, so he may serve me as a priest. They are to make a chest piece, an ephod, a robe, an embroidered tunic, a turban, and a sash. They will also make special garments for Aaron's sons to wear when they serve as priests before me. These items must be made of fine linen cloth and embroidered with gold thread and blue, purple, and scarlet yarn.
So blue and scarlet and purple are some of those, or at least blue and purple are unnatural colors that were hard to come by, which is why those are things that represent like royalty and kind of importance and everything. But when we come to these garments, again, we're coming to this is something that's important. I do want to kind of walk through some of the parts that are on the garments. So Aaron and his sons, they're set apart to serve as priests. They become a special class of people, and it's not that they're important, they're just set aside for a sacred duty. Not that they're more important or anything like that. Here's a picture of what the outfits might have looked like. Looks very similar to the video that we just watched. And so one of the ideas of these vestments is they're just beautiful. And so here we're coming back to God is sacred, God is important, the worship of God is sacred and important. And so we're being wasteful because it's special. And they're there to signify all of the beauty and made with the finest of the materials that you could come up with in that day. If you're ever really curious, the Phoenicians that are kind of on the coast land are the one they were known for the special dyeing of purple, and it made them a very rich land. That they're to the west of Israel, and that was what they were known for. And it was because they were by the sea, and there was special. I think it was like seashells or something that they would
Snails
get.
or something, wasn't it?
I forget exactly what it was, but it was
snails.
only there, and that's where the purple came from. And they would ship it around the world to kind of use. Here we have the ephod, so it's this very richly embroidered garment that they would wear around them, and I think that this is cool. So it would have two stones with the 12 tribes of Israel engraved into it. Again, not something I've been ever the most familiar with. Maybe I learned it at some point, but that was fascinating to me. And so the symbolization of it is that you're carrying the Israelites on your shoulders before God. And so God is kind of carrying all of Israel. They're like symbolized in the priest carrying it.
I'm surprised they don't have a staff or something. The staffs, like the Egyptians and stuff, is always a sign of importance. When you see our bishop, he has his staff or goes down.
Yeah, and that has to do with like pastoral things. So I wonder where that was comes from the shepherd.
Yeah.
So maybe it's a bit more correcting. I guess at this point, when you're serving in a temple, you're less one-on-one. You're not as.
I don't know.
And so when we look at this, though, it sounds weird. Like, why is there so much detail with all these funny names and everything? As a reminder, so as Episcopalians, we have lots of funny terms and garments too. And so we have an albastole, a chasuble, a cassock, a cincture, a surplice, a mitre, the bishop's hat, a pectoral cross, a coat. And in case you didn't know what all those meant, I wanted to take this moment to talk about it. So that alb is that white kind of garment that you wear, and that represents purity in Christ. So we are weirder than they are with all of the different things that we have. The stole is that like scarf-looking thing that they wear on the sides, and that actually mirrors the Jewish priests that would wear a stole like that. The chasuble, that's that thing that looks like a flying squirrel that they put on at Eucharist, and that's a pretty special Episcopalian thing. Not everyone has those. The cassock is the weird dress Billy wears all the time. The cincture is the rope that you use to gird up your robe and everything. Funny story, Father Pat, when he was nervous, would spin his rope around. And when we began live streaming, it became a problem because he was not used to cameras, and he would just sit there and spin it. And it was always like Christopher would do the dismissal, and every like Sunday, because I think we used to like pre-record the services and then post them. And I'd be like, Pat, stop swinging your rope around because it was so distracting. And he would hit things with it. It was funny. What's really cool about some of those, and especially like the difference in a deacon's stole that's on the side, is that the idea is you could pick up your robes and a deacon is ready to serve all the time. And so that sachet kind of looks like a soldier, and so he could throw his robe over and be ready to go on a moment's notice, kind of like that. So you have the surplice. That's that big white fluffy thing that like a Eucharistic minister will wear. I can't wear them because our sizes here are too big and I get swallowed up. So I was told to stop wearing them because you can't see me, which might be the point of the action. The mitre is that funny hat that the bishop wears. So there's a pectoral cross. This is more worn by bishops and bishop staff, like canons, or maybe some of the cathedral. And that's that really like big cross that they'll kind of wear in front of them. And then there's a cope, and I don't know what that is, but when I looked it up, it said it was one of them that they wear in non-Eucharistic services. I've never heard of that before, but I did look up some pictures of things. So it kind of looks like Billy, doesn't like in this little thing. So here's the the weird people in their cassocks. So here, what's this called?
Stole.
Stole. What's this white thing called?
Chessel.
No.
That's
a
a green
thing.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's the surplice, the
Surplice.
big white fluffy thing. That one's not as big as fluffy. Ours are really big here. There's the chasuble. Here's some other people. Doesn't even look like a flying squirrel. And here's someone else wearing it. So we have funny vestments too. When you look at this, you go, they're really weird. Well, we're weirder. We have more than they have. And all of them have different meanings behind them and everything. They also would have this big breastplate on it. And they had the Urim and the Thummim. I don't know how exactly to say it. But this is kind of like casting lots, essentially is what they were. And it was used for divining God's purposes or message or something like that. They had other things too. So the turban that they wear, so think of it like the mitre, the bishop's hat. And new to me, I never knew this, it said "Holy to the Lord" engraved on it. I love that. I thought that was really cool. And all of these things are here. Again, it's sacred. It's setting them apart, not because they're special, but because they have a sacred purpose, and we're putting weight and importance to it. Seem good?
Yeah.
Great. I'm loving how fast this is going. This is awesome. Chapter 29 is we're going to move into the ordination of the priest. There's a lot of text that's kind of given to this, so I broke it up just a little smaller. First is the preparation. So they are clothed in the garments, they're anointed with oil. And then there's all these series of sacrifices that they're going to go through. So they sacrifice a bull for the sin offering, and that's to atone for the new priest sins. They sacrifice 2 rams. One is a burnt offering, so unto the Lord, and the other is for their own ordination. There's bread and grain offerings that they just kind of throw in there, I guess because they had extra bread. They apply the blood, which is a thing that they're going to do a lot, and that is reminding us of our own brokenness, the sacredness of life. And when you shed that blood, it's kind of to cover for your sins, is the idea. And then they have a wave offering, that they're going to wave the things before God. To me, it makes me think of the thurifer with the incense, kind of waving it back and forth, kind of idea. And I'd like to imagine again, we're so important. We're doing all the different things that we can do. You can smell it. You can see it. You can feel it. We're hitting every different medium that we can because it's important. The other thing chapter 29 talks about is the daily offerings that they would give. So there's the incense table, and they are burning incense every morning and every evening. The idea behind incense is it's like your prayers. You can see them rising before God, and it's engaging your senses in a way. I have an article on my website that I wrote a long time ago, and it's my most read article, and it's about engaging the body in worship. And I talk about, for me, how it is special in the ways that we worship, particularly with incense. Whenever I smell incense, I'm immediately brought into the attitude of prayer, because the way it engages you. And so it's really special. I also talk about prayer beads, which I'm really into. I always like to wear them, because when I hold them and feel them, it engages me. And that's what we're seeing a lot of here. It's engaging all of you to bring you into the worship experience, remind you of the importance. The other things we're seeing is that they're actually going to make regular offerings every morning and every evening with different rams. Again, we're showing the importance of this. Doesn't it seem wasteful? That's a lot of work to go slaughter an animal, cook it, clean it up. It's a lot of things to do. So we're showing its importance. One of the things that I think is special at the end of chapter 29 is this was originally where I was going to end it, and then I decided to go ahead and tack on to follow the Jewish lectionary, the next part. But we're seeing God's confirmation to us about God's own presence with us. All of these things are representing God's presence to us and God's love for us, or to Israel, but we'll say us too. And that's special. They also make that altar of incense And same thing, it's burned morning and evening. One thing I think is cool about it, and we're going to play a video that's going to talk about this in a second, is that when it was consecrated, it took 7 days for it to be consecrated. And one of the things that they would do once a year is put the blood from that atonement ram. Do you remember this story? Is it about the atonement ram? So it's not, this is a little bit kind of in the future, but so they're sacrificing a ram each day, one in the morning, one in the evening. Once a year, they would take 2 of them and they would kill one, cover the one alive with its blood and set it free. And it was a picture of God's forgiveness because of the shedding of blood towards us as the one goes free. And you know, our Christianizing it is then looking at the cross of Jesus, with Jesus' blood that's shed, and that we partake in Eucharist. And they'd take that blood once a year into the most holy of holies. The high priest would go in there and use that blood in that room. I'm really just fascinated if you only move this, or if it's something that's moved, but you can only go in the room like once a year, so that they take the room down. Like, I just have so many questions about the practicalities that's not that important. What is important, though, is this picture about a temple or a tabernacle as being a dwelling place for God. So we're going to play a video from the Bible Project. It's 12:45. That was great on time. I am so happy. We'll be done with all of this. That was awesome. Okay.
If you could go back to the city of
Can everyone hear
during 500,
this? Okay.
the biggest thing you'd see is the temple.
This beautiful building was designed by King David and built by King Solomon, and they believed that it was the home of the God of heaven.
Wait, I thought God's home was in heaven.
Well, the whole point of this earthly temple is that it's the place that overlaps with God's heavenly home. The temple is where God lives and rules all creation as king.
That's cool, but even Solomon, who built the temple, didn't believe that it could contain the God of the universe, right?
Yeah, the building was just a symbol, and it pointed to the fact that all of creation is God's temple. And that's actually what the first page of the Bible, Genesis 1, is all about.
Really? It says that creation is God's temple?
Well, it doesn't need to say it. The whole story shows it. In Genesis 1, God creates an ordered world out of a dark wasteland by speaking in a series of 7 days. Then on the 7th day, God's presence fills creation as he takes up his rest and rule. Similarly, the tabernacle and later the temple were built and dedicated in a series of 7 speeches in 7 days, after which the priest or king could rest and rule in God's presence.
So all of creation is where God intends to dwell. It's like his temple.
Exactly. Now, turn the page to Genesis 2 and we get another portrait of creation. This one focuses in on the land. And in the center of the land is a region called Eden, which in Hebrew means delight.
And in the middle of delight, God plants a garden in which God and humanity live together.
And that's why the temple was modeled after the garden, filled with imagery of gold and flowers. The menorah symbolized the tree of life. It's the place where God dwells with his people.
Oh, got it.
And check this out. In the temple, the Israelite priests and Levites were to work and to keep the temple in God's presence. This is exactly the job description given to humanity in the Garden of Eden.
So these humans were the first priests. But instead of ruling with God, they wanted to rule on their own terms, and they're exiled from the garden temple.
And, like Adam and Eve, Israel's leaders also wanted to rule on their own terms, and they too were exiled.
The temple was destroyed, and this left them wondering, did God give up on Israel? Will God bring about a new creation?
Well, the biblical prophets anticipated the day when God would create a new temple with a new priesthood. That's when God's presence would fill all of creation.
And when the Israelites returned to the land, they did rebuild the temple.
But that temple didn't turn out the way the prophets hoped. In fact, later Israelite prophets said that this temple was hopelessly corrupt.
So they're still waiting for the ultimate temple.
And here we come to the story of Jesus. He said that through him, God's presence and rule was coming into our world in a new way. And he presented himself as a new kind of priest.
But Jesus wasn't a priest, and he didn't work in the temple.
Right. Jesus said that God's presence, his rest and rule, was filling the world through his own life, death, and resurrection. Jesus was claiming that he was the true temple. And this new temple would expand out to include all of creation.
That's a really big claim.
And it got even bigger. After his resurrection, Jesus said that God's presence would come to dwell in and among his followers so that they would become mini temples.
Communities of people where God rests and rules.
Exactly. This is the Bible's vision of the church, which is described as a temple.
Not a building, but people.
Yeah, like when Peter says, "You all are living stones built up as a temple for God's Spirit to dwell."
So, at the end of the story, do we ever get a new physical temple?
Well, not exactly. What we see is a renewed cosmic temple, just like Genesis 1. And this new creation doesn't need a temple building, because through Jesus, all creation is now the place where God rests and rules the world with his people.
It may seem really boring to read these texts, and it kind of is, but there is a specialness to it. We are setting aside this sacredness for the worship of God and for God to dwell in. But to me, what's really cool is we're not stuck in Exodus. That's why I wanted to play this video. It's jumping forward, talking some about the temple, and jumping even farther into the New Testament, and ends in Revelation there with Jesus ruling at the end. But it's a reminder for us, just as important, the intricacies of the tabernacle in creating this kind of dwelling place for God. One of the things we hold on to as Christians is God dwells in us. And so my encouragement for you to take away this week is be as intentional for making yourself a dwelling place for God as the Israelites did for this tabernacle. Care about your spiritual life. I know for me, being stuck and isolated for the last 2 weeks was really hard. I felt myself going into that like ruddy depression like I did kind of with COVID, just being stuck at home. Being here at Ascension is one of those gifts for me. And I'm thankful I had a job. Otherwise, I think I would have kind of lost my mind, not having anything to kind of focus my attention towards. And so hold on to this idea that you are sacred and you are special and God dwells in you, and create more dwelling spaces for God. Thank you.
Thank you.
9 minutes to spare. That was great.
But I have a question, and
Yeah.
you may have addressed it. Did you find this group, was so appreciative of you? Did you find an